Please note, we would like to make it very clear, we are totally against the form of discipline described in the articles and accounts being used on minors and non-consenting adults. Although some of these accounts are fictional, and others may be an exaggerated reality, none of them are too far from the truth of what really happened back in those days. If you are enjoying our stories, please do subscribe to this channel. We will be posting many more stories as time goes by. One of my most vivid memories of being spanked. It was a warm, late summer day, and my mother and I were out with some other young mothers with children my age. Apparently, she decided at some point that it was time for us to go, but I didn't come when she called me. Actually, I was too far away for her to call, but she sent another little boy to get me and bring me back. But I didn't believe him and stayed where I was. When I did finally wander back, she was very displeased with me, and announced in front of all the other mothers and kids, "You're going to get a smacked bottom when we get home, young man." I suspect my disobedience had embarrassed her in front of the other mothers, and she wanted them all to know that she was, in fact, a good disciplinarian, which, back in those days, meant a spanking disciplinarian. For my part, I was thunderstruck at her words. I'd had no idea that I was in trouble. She quickly took her leave of the other mothers, then seized me firmly by my hand and marched me off in the direction of home. I felt stunned because I hadn't imagined myself to have been misbehaving, although looking back I can see how, from her point of view, I had been very naughty indeed and deserving of the ultimate punishment. As we marched homeward hand in hand, I kept looking beseechingly up at her, hoping this was all some kind of mistake, since, in fact, it was. She ignored my gaze, though continuing to look straight ahead, her expression solemn and resolute. Her big maternal hand felt so soft and warm gripping mine. But when I looked at it, just inches from my eyes, in that moment I saw only an instrument of pain. I knew from several years of experience just how much Mommy's palm hurt when repeatedly applied to my upturned bottom. Each step we took brought me closer to a reacquaintance with that reality. When we got home, she marched me straight upstairs to my room, closing the door behind us. She sat down on the side of my bed, and I expected her to put me over her knee forthwith as she usually did. But instead, she got me out of my shoes and socks. She told me lay on the bed, face down. My hands pasted themselves protectively across my behind, and my wide teary eyes turned back to look at her over my shoulder, desperately trying to stall for time. In a meek, frightened little voice I implored Mommy to please give me another chance, saying I hadn't meant to be naughty, and please, please please not to spank me. Her demeanor clearly revealed that her earlier anger at my behavior had passed, and that she really didn't want to carry out the discipline she had promised. On this I pinned my slim, frantic hope of a last-minute pardon. But my mother was a firm believer in a consistency, which meant that if she promised my sister or me a spanking, we always got it. As I learned later in life, my mother believed that if she promised a spanking and didn't follow through, her authority would be undermined, and misbehavior would worsen. She took hold of my wrists with her left hand and pinned them snugly against the small of my back, which left me completely unable to move or cover myself up. Her eyes were sad and moist, and it was obvious she really didn't want to go through with her earlier promise. I hoped that maybe she really wouldn't, and that she had just pulled down my underpants to give me a scare, and that maybe, just maybe, she was going to let me off with a warning. But after quietly admonishing me for several seconds more, she raised her open hand high. My view of her face blurred from sudden tears as I frantically cried, "No, Mommy, please no." My shouts of protest quickly dissolved into cries of distress as Mommy began to administer crisp, smarting smacks squarely across both cheeks of my bottom. As the all-too-familiar sensation of Mommy's punishing palm welled up, I turned my head to cry into my pillow as she continued to swiftly smack me. Each slap hurt worse than the last, and very soon I was bawling with pain, my pillowcase wet with my tears. At last, she got up and left my room, closing my door behind her. At once, my hands shot back to rub the smarting pain from my pink little backside while I continued to cry. As the minutes passed, my sobs and sniffles slowly subsided, and I noticed myself recovering a bit more quickly than I usually did from a mommy spanking. That's when I realized that although she had given me the discipline she had promised, and though it had certainly hurt, she'd been a little less severe with me that afternoon than she usually was.